Hello, welcome back to the Micro Advice Podcast. Today, we are here with Joe Davey, Chairman and CEO at Bonsai, a Seattle-based company that provides audience generation solutions for marketing teams in both startups and Fortune 500 companies. Joe, thank you for taking the time to speak with us today.
Happy to be here, Jim.
So, Joe, you have a ton of great experience starting two companies, serving on the customer advisory board at Microsoft, as well as serving on startup boards at various other companies in Seattle. So I take it you know a thing or two when it comes to what works well and what does not when providing a superior customer journey. So let's dig in a little bit because I'd love to hear your expertise on some of these areas. Recently, I came across a Deloitte research study which highlighted that buyers are more educated now than ever, and a knowledgeable consumer base comes with very different spending patterns. So, given this, what is your take on how sales and marketing teams need to be engaging the customer? And then, better yet, handing off that information to other teams to streamline this customer journey?
There's a huge shift happening here, which is 10 years ago, if you wanted to buy something, you went through an RFP process, sent an RFP to 10 vendors, and you narrowed it down to three, and you were engaged heavily with their sales teams as a part of doing that. This was in the days when people would submit orders by fax machine, right? Today, something like 60% of buyers just don't buy that way anymore. They make a purchase decision before they ever even talk to sales. And what that means is buyers aren't making decisions based on your feature check boxes in your spreadsheet and best and final offer pricing. Buyers are making decisions based on, do they emotionally connect with your brand? Have they built relationships with your team? Why do they feel that your solution is uniquely suited to their needs? What does your solution do that uniquely speaks to their business or aligns to their industry or their market or whatever? And so it's a completely different buying process when you think that over half of purchases are happening without ever interacting with anyone in sales. What that means is today it's marketing's responsibility really to build those relationships, to educate those customers, to define the story of who your company is, right? We talk a lot about customer personas, buyer personas, things like that. But companies don't spend a lot of time thinking about their own persona, right? Who is their company? Like, what are the values that they want to express to their customers? What are the emotional things that they want their customers to connect to them on? So what we've seen is obviously that trend is it's already big, it's accelerating. In the future, it's just going to be more and more marketing driven. It means that marketers have to have better tools to have those conversations, to educate those buyers or customers and build those relationships. And so our business really in large part is about enabling that kind of education and relationship building and everything else through events. And that could be anything from like an in-person event like a executive dinner all the way up to something like a big hybrid conference or virtual conference or a webinar, so you can have a small number of highly selective participants. You can have thousands of broad-based participants. But the idea is all the same, which is, regardless of whether it's an online, offline, or an on-demand interaction, how do you help your buyers understand who you are as a company, and how do you educate them about what they need to be thinking about, what they need to be aware of, what's going on in the market, what are their competitors doing, what are the things that they could be gaining advantages as a business, or where are the things that they could be missing out on because they're just not aware of them. And so we think it's just really an interesting opportunity for marketers really to take more active role in that relationship building and really in the sales process, right? And you've probably seen graph where in the past it was marketing's up here and sales is down here on the funnel, right? Now today it really is like marketing and sales. They each own their own pieces of that funnel. Sales has to be there at the early conversations, those very tip-top webinar impressions or event impressions or whatever, to start forming those relationships at that stage, because you may not get the chance if you don't form the relationships early. You may never cross the line and get the chance if a buyer is making a decision without you in the room.
Yeah, those are all very good points. And I really love the one you brought up about companies need to drive an emotional connection with their product or service and their customer.
I'll give you a great example that, there's a million marketing automation and email marketing providers out there, but people choose HubSpot for more than just its email sending capabilities or, its high quality whitelisted IP addresses or whatever little feature it might have. People choose HubSpot because they buy what HubSpot's about as a company, right? They buy that culture that HubSpot has created, and people want to be a part of it. And that's ultimately a big piece of the value that HubSpot has created for their moat, right? Really, as a business, is they've built a moat around having that emotional connection with the market, with their customers, right? And I mean, HubSpot is just one example. There's lots of other examples of companies that have done this really well. My old company Avalara was a great example of this, right? Where usually you think of sales tax as being a really boring thing that, God forbid, you got to spend 5 minutes talking about it, right? Avalara was able to do things like create day-long events, and they still do this. They have a multi-day conference. They have day-long events. We did tons of stuff like that, and people loved it. And the reason they love it is because Avalara found a way to make it fun, right? Avalara's motto, at least in the early days, was make sales tax less taxing. And our whole idea was tax is really boring and it's a lot of rote details, and the people who do it don't get treated very well, right? They get just treated like, oh, you're just the person to deal with the boring details. But what if you treated those people like they want to have fun too? And so we would show up to events or show up to conferences with, everybody else got their normal little felt booth. We've got a tiki hut, and everybody else is handing out koozies or whatever. That Avalara would hand out light up rings for people to take home to their kids, or we'd get a margarita machine going behind the booth, stuff like that, where we built just tons of goodwill in the market. And over time, it just became this huge moat where everybody else in that market is the same way. They're all just tax companies. And Avalara is really like this fun, dynamic culture. And so people respond to that.
You essentially weren't selling a service, you were selling an experience. And
It's
that's
both,
what kept
right?
the people coming to you.
It's definitely both. I mean, you have to have the great you have to have the great service. It has to work. It has to be a great product. But ultimately, at the end of the day, like
Mhm.
people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. So people will buy you because of the emotional connection that they feel. They will keep you because you meet their needs. So you do have to deliver on that promise. It's not enough to just be, Fire Festival and like have a really cool brand and then everybody shows up and it's, cheese sandwiches and horrible FEMA shelters. You can't do that. You got to actually deliver. But in terms of your earlier question, which is really like, redefining that buyer's journey or the customer journey, the biggest thing that's changed about the customer journey is front door has been replaced.
That's a great story. Excellent stories there. So I've been reading a lot of various different CX research papers and reports around customer demand experience over product. And I've heard the term experiential marketing thrown around a little bit. And this very closely relates to how you ended your last question. But from this, what is Bonsai doing in this space?
We think experiential marketing experiences are kind of the future of the marketing paradigm in a way. It's a really great question because it's really fundamental to who we are as a business, but also to this bigger shift that we see going on, which is millennials, Gen Z, Gen X. These are experience-oriented consumers. In their personal life, they're used to getting a certain type of level of interaction or quality of interaction, and companies that can deliver that same level of quality of interaction are going to be the ones that win. So if I'm a 35-year-old who on the weekend I go to a beer festival, or I go to a music festival or something like that, or ordinary consumer experiences have been so elevated that if I do that over the weekend, then I come back on Monday morning and I take off my Joe Davy hat and I put on my CEO of Bonsai hat, I'm still the same human and the same things still appeal to me. But all of a sudden, now I'm making decisions for my company instead of for, myself personally. And so experiential marketing is really about creating those types of experiences that engage customers, engage prospects, just engage the market generally, so that ultimately companies can start to build the personal relationships, sure, but also that brand relationship, and can do that education, right, as a part of it. And so that's the advantage, right? Versus if you just run an ad at somebody, or you just send somebody yet another email, or you just make yet another cold call, you're not building relationships, they're not interactive, you're not learning anything from them, you're not gathering any data, you're not educating or informing them in any way, really. So it just becomes more noise, right? The advantage of experiential marketing as a strategy is you get to be interactive, you get to build those personal relationships, you get to have those deeper connections, and you get to do the education that you want to do and that your buyers really want, that they really crave. So it's going to be a total shift in the paradigm, in my opinion, over the next 10, 20 years as companies start to really adopt this. But it's a huge source of untapped potential for most companies.
That's incredible. And last time we spoke, you had mentioned something to me. I jotted it down. It was focus on the broader buyer's journey. You touched on this a little bit, but is this what you meant about that kind of bigger focus and the journey, how they come to you, how they decide or determine to buy your product or service?
100%. But okay, so the mistake that most companies make is really simple. They start off when they're small, they learn a really simple formula, which is my leads convert into opportunities, my opportunities convert into closed won customers, and I retain some of the, some percent of those customers, right? So that's this really simple formula. And so they just focus on that, right? How do I get more leads into the top of that? How do I get, that more leads gives me more ops gives me more customers, right? And that may be true, but every company hits a certain phase where they say, okay, well, wait a second, what do we do? We can't make any more cold calls, or we can't send any more emails, or it becomes cost prohibitive to just simply run more ads. And so what do we do? And the answer is really, for companies, I think it's about defining that thought leadership and, again, that experience and relationship building. But experiences are a way to interact with the broader market before they've even said, I'm a lead, look at me, talk to me, right? Like we said earlier, 60% of customers make a buying decision before they talk to your sales rep. And so by the time they raise their hand and say, I'm a lead, over half your market has already made up its mind. And so what that means is you got to focus as a marketer on how do you speak to those people before your sales rep gets involved. You have to take ownership as a marketer for educating and informing and helping people understand your benefits and everything else, right? It's not enough to just stick an ad in Google anymore and drive people to a conversion form.
60%. I didn't realize that high of
Yeah.
the percent of market that kind of has already made up their mind and they just need pushed over it with the sales
And
rep.
that for the other 40%, they're engaging with sales because they're going to
Mhm.
learn. They want to weigh different options, stuff like that. I mean, that's dwindling because more and more of that information is getting out there, right? Live demos are getting out there. People are doing on-demand webinars where they publish demos, they publish Q&A, they publish polls and other things that happen during that event. They're putting that out there and they're giving people access to that, so they don't need to go do introductory product demo with every single lead that comes through. They can say, hey, here's our product demo. Go check it out. Ask me if you have any questions, right? And so for that 40%, that's shrinking, they are still having those sales interactions. The other 60%, they are really gathering that information before they're ever talking to sales. And so in doing that, they're allowing marketers to educate and inform them, not sales. And so if you're a sales rep and you're dependent on that 60%, you're just waiting for somebody to come along and realize, wait a second, this person's just taking an order. And so this is a challenge for both sales and marketing, right? For sales is to figure out, how do I move higher up that funnel, right? How do I become, how do I start building relationships with people when they're just leads, or even when they're not leads, before they become leads? And for marketing, it's the same question of, how do I support and educate people and build these buyer journeys all the way through the funnel.
That's fantastic. I was thinking about a personal story the other day where if I decide to buy a new car, it's usually not because of a commercial or an ad I get or see. It really is, hey, I need a car that does this function. For instance, one that goes really well in the snow. And a lot of how I make that decision comes from referrals from people I know who have owned a similar car. Or I'll call up various folks and say, hey, you have a Subaru versus a BMW versus a Chevy versus a Ford. Which one goes best in the snow from your perspective? And then, so much to your point, I already know which one I'm going to go buy without even seeing the ad. I'll reach out to them and say, hey, I want a Subaru, for instance.
I think it's a great example, right? I mean, the ads probably inform at some level, what your feelings are about the brand, right? What does that brand stand for? And that's great and that's beneficial. But yeah, to your point, I mean, when you go buy a car today, you make your decision, you read your reviews, you go to Edmunds.com, you talk to your friends, you get educated about which car do you want to buy. Then once you make that decision, then you go online and you start, searching for who's got that car in their inventory. So, I mean, I bought a truck recently. I didn't go to 4 different dealerships and do different test drives. I figured out, this is the truck I want. And I narrowed it down to 2 trucks that were at, one dealership, and I drove there and I test drove both of those trucks, but I had already decided to buy one of them before I ever walked in the door. It was the easiest sale they ever made, and they knew it, right? And I knew it too, right? Because I already knew that was the best deal out there in the market, that was the truck that had the features I wanted, all that stuff, right? And so, and I think that's just what's happening with buyers, right? That access to information is becoming more and more pervasive. Figuring out how to supply that information to the market is the biggest challenge for a lot of companies today.
I love these 2 anecdotes because that really proves the point that we brought up in question 1 around a more educated consumer base changes your buying behavior. Years ago, you would have walked into multiple different car dealerships, test drove each one, learned about it from the sales agent. Now there's a litany of resources where, just to your point, you knew exactly which truck you wanted to buy before you even walked in the door. I would venture to say a lot of car buyers nowadays follow the same path, where so many resources out there that you have that knowledge and you can go in with a leading perspective.
Mhm.
Joe, so if you spend any time on LinkedIn or any of the various different news, there seems to be this wave or this movement, at least in customer success, around serving others, giving before asking, things of that nature. So how do you go about this in Bonsai? As I believe also you mentioned that you've adopted a similar mindset where you have the entire team working with this mentality. How did you achieve that?
Well, I mean, every day is a new attempt to do it better, right? I don't think you ever reach a moment of stasis where you declare victory, but for us, we've done a couple of things. Number one, we made serving others one of our core values. And when we say that, we do, yes, mean serving the customer. We also mean the other stakeholders that are part of our business, our employees and our partners and even our vendors. We want to be easy to work with. We want to be a company that people like doing business with. And so serving others, putting others' needs at least at the forefront of our mind as we're going about our day, that's really important. I think there's another bigger thing here, which is really about serving communities. And in the olden days, like let's say prior to the 1970s and kind of the emergence of the financialization of corporate America, companies were largely kind of owned and managed and controlled by a relatively small group of people. And typically, that group of people lived in the same community with their employees. The owners of the company were oftentimes the managers of the company, or sometimes the workers in the company were the owners of the company. And because of that, companies invested a lot more in their communities. They felt a responsibility to do it, and they kind of had a reason to do it. It was they didn't have to go explain to their shareholders, why are we investing in this town, because the shareholders were already right there in the town. They implicitly understood it, right? And the two concepts were really connected. After that kind of advent of the financialization of corporations, we saw this rise in the 80s of like leveraged buyouts, and a lot of times you don't even know who the ultimate beneficiary or the ultimate shareholder is. Your shareholder is, Vanguard or BlackRock or whatever, if you're a big enough company. If you're a small business, it's a little bit different. We've also seen a lot of consolidation, companies buying up more and more smaller businesses. And so, I think a lot of people feel this, and look, I don't think it's always fair, but people will point to companies like Walmart's ruining our town, or Amazon's ruining our town, or whatever, and they'll point to these big corporations, and they have a tendency to kind of blame all the bad stuff that's happening on those corporations. Okay, is that fair? Probably not. But what's certainly fair is that the dynamic has completely shifted, right? Companies today just don't have the same stake in the communities that they're a part of. They just don't. And so how do you change that? I think if nothing else, we have, companies and CEOs in general have to start thinking about how are they going to make the world a little bit better. It's not everybody's primary job. I get that. You think of companies like, oh, the company is a vehicle for aggregating earnings and compounding those earnings to the maximum extent possible. That's some people's definition of a corporation. I think that's changing because I think that the customers are changing, right? I think customers care more about seeing companies give back and seeing the impact that companies have and serve the communities that they're a part of. And for a lot of businesses today, that means really companies have to think globally about giving back, and it's a big challenge. I think it's going to be really interesting to see how companies respond to that. Over the next 10, 20 years, with the rise of things like ESG investing and other similar new financial vehicles that we really haven't dealt with on a very large scale before. It's going to change things a little bit.
I would completely agree with you. And even recently, within the past year, I've seen this quite a bit. So I'm heavily involved in the customer success, customer experience communities. And before the pandemic, when we were all in the office, there were these local maybe chapters or groups within one company. Then it sort of all came to a grinding halt when a lot of folks started working from home. Lately, I've been seeing these online versions crop up with customer success practitioners around the world joining in one community of practice where you're sharing knowledge, tools, templates, resources, each other, and helping each other find jobs and grow in your career. I would imagine there's similar communities across different professions of engineering or quality assurance, sales, marketing, whatnot. And it's amazing to see that because it was kind of like you said, it was like a bubble where we had these communities around different industries way back when. Then they started kind of shrinking and everything became globalized and distant. And I'm starting to see that again in some different form. But there is that natural tendency for humans to want to form a various community around your interests. That's great.
Yeah, somebody once said that there's only two ways to make money in television: bundling and unbundling. And yeah, I mean, the same thing, applies to communities, right? So, and what we've seen is, people moving away from bundling around the corporation, which was kind of the story of the 20th century. And now we're seeing, people bundling around their occupation, right? And so, people are not loyal to their companies anymore. It's the company's responsibility to keep the employees, not the employee's responsibility to stay at the company their whole life. And I think, frankly, it's because a lot of employees have been burned by bad behavior from companies, or sometimes tough but necessary behavior from companies. But I think there's a lot of disillusionment among people today. And yeah, I think it's natural extension of the internet that people that are professionals in a certain field will stick together with people from that field. I still talk every week, almost every day, to prior colleagues from other companies that I've worked at. They don't work here necessarily, but I still talk to them about things that are related to the businesses that we're all doing separately now. And so it's just a way of forming those communities that go beyond what the name on your paycheck.
That's spot on. Joe, last question for today. So, I like to wrap these up with, are there one or two things, lessons learned in your experience throughout all your different roles as an advisor and CEO, maybe that you've learned on how to offer a better customer experience or make some quick wins if a company is seeking those sorts of activities?
So the number one thing I found personally in my career is to know my own limitations, right? Know your limits. Where are you strong? Where are you weak? I think the people that are really good at that and the companies that are really good at that, about being honest with themselves about that, are the ones that ultimately do well. Because if you don't acknowledge it, you can't do anything about it. I would challenge companies, regardless of what seat you sit in, to think about your company and think really objectively. What are we great at? What are we weak at? The things that you're weak at, those are the things that you have to think about building out to compensate for those weaknesses, right? I may know personally that I have whatever X weakness. I'm gonna, there's too many to list, I'm sure. I'm gonna go hire people that can support me there. I think in a company it's the same thing, right? If you're looking and saying, geez, our support process, our support KPIs are really not where they need to be, or, geez, we're really not, generating enough leads, or, geez, our sales, conversion rates are not high enough, or, our onboarding processes are taking too long, or whatever. I think you really have to be very open-minded and very honest with yourself about identifying those issues and those problems. And then you actually have to make investments in them. It's not that complicated, but most companies won't bother to do it. So I think for us, like we're far from perfect. Our customers remind us of that every single day, so that's great. But we're also our own worst critics, right? If a customer tells us something that isn't right, I mean, we feel it 10 times more than they do, because we know that it's not just that one customer that's impacted, right? That it's lots of customers behind them. And so we spend a lot of time, we take those small complaints very seriously, because behind every little complaint is a bigger problem. And so, we try to be very realistic about that. It's easy to ignore the things that you say, oh, well, it's just one customer. Oh, it's just a couple of customers. Oh, it's not that big of a deal. Oh, is that really impacting revenue? But overall, as you said, it's really about the customer experience as a whole, and customers talk to their friends. And every single customer that you have is either an opportunity to create a positive impression or an opportunity to create a negative impression when their friend calls them up and says, hey, what do you think of this company? And so so we really try to take every single one of those very seriously, because we know that doing that's going to pay dividends in the long run.
That's very sage advice. Joe, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. This is fantastic insight.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. Really enjoyed it.
And thank you all for listening. If you enjoyed this video, there are several others on YouTube, iTunes, and Spotify. Please feel free to subscribe, follow us, drop a comment, or ask a question. Have a great week. Hopefully we'll see you back here, same place, same time next week. Bye now.